thanks for taking time out on this lovely summer day. We'd like to start. Everybody sees on the screen, we have our current and past presidents for the roundtable today. We'll start with a welcome from current President Hank Blaney.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Hank Blaney. I am an advertising sales manager at Elsevier. And I can see, looking at the president's panel, what an illustrious future I have in store for myself. Before we begin, a brief note about Association of Medical Media. What does AMM do for you? To be completely honest, when my specialty is rocking and rolling and I have tons of commercial sponsorship that I'm selling at Elsevier, AMM isn't critical. However, I've noticed, because Elsevier works with a lot of associations and a lot of societies, that because annual meeting may have been postponed or went virtual, a lot of our partners are having a cash flow crisis. Because they're in a crunch, because they're in a pinch, there's been some downsizing or some right sizing with our partners. And I've also seen at big pharma, particularly in dental or elective surgery, that there's also been some cutbacks there. The point is, when your specialty is rocking and rolling, you don't necessarily, it's not critical for you to be with AMM with every meeting. However, if you're being right sized or displaced, AMM will be there for you. We have a job board. Please take care of it. Please do visit us either virtually or in person. I will greet you at the elevator with a bowl of rose petals and bring you into the convention room. We are here for you. We are your network. When you need the AMM, it's open to you. It's free. If you don't have a home right now, please consider AMM your home. We'll get you a badge. Don't hesitate to call the executive council. We are your network. Don't hesitate to call AMM members. Take advantage of the job board. When it's time to circle the wagons, we will, of course. We're a tight, small group, and we're all here to help each other. Thank you. Back to you, Jason.
Thanks, Hank. And thanks to everybody joining us today. Again, I'm your host, Jason Carris, and we've had a successful run of these virtual roundtables and hope to continue it. And as Todd kind of teased, John Bigelow and I are planning on doing a monthly regulatory and legislative update. So keep an eye out for that. And also, before I go too far, as host of the AMM official podcast, AMM Conversation, make sure to check us out both online at ammonline.org and then through any of the popular podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, etc. We're right in the middle of season 2 with the new normal in medical media. We'll be finishing that up with a couple of episodes here over the next few weeks. Looking forward to that. So without further ado, we'll be discussing a range of topics today, from state of the industry and pharma's response to the pandemic to regulatory issues and other more detailed issues like impact of a cookieless future and, again, everybody's favorite, where are we going with medical meetings. You've already met Hank, so let's meet the rest of our past president panelists. Let's start with introductions. Lisa Healy.
Hi, this is Lisa Healy. I am president of BioPharma Media Services, and I am the current past president. I passed on the torch to Hank this year, and what a year it's been for him. And I am the media representative for the past presidents.
And John Bigelow.
Hi, I'm John Bigelow. I was president of the AMM in 2004 when I headed Cliggett Publishing. I then, for 8 years, was CEO of the medical communications firm, Knowledge Point 360 Group, and now I'm executive director of the Coalition for Healthcare Communication.
Lori?
Hi, everybody. Thanks to the AMM for inviting me, and Jason as well for pulling this together. I'm really happy to join my esteemed colleagues on the panel. My name is Lori Raskin. I've had an extensive career doing marketing, communications, research, and media planning in the life sciences, medical ad agency, and medical publishing sectors. And I'm soon to be launching a consultancy in the industry where I can put my knowledge and expertise to work. So stay tuned.
Thanks, Lori. Stephanie?
Hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie Hanaway. I'm the Director of Journal Media for the American Academy of Family Physicians. I've been with the Academy for close to 14 years, and before that, I spent 20-something plus years in the business-to-business space in industries ranging from entertainment to agriculture and kind of everything in between. So happy to be here.
Thanks everybody for being here. Well, let's get right to it. You know, the pandemic is here in the United States is nearing a 6-month mark. It's almost sobering to say those words. And while we've seen some successes and some good news, you know, we're also in, you know, a state of flux. We don't know where we're going with this. Fortunately, you know, while some industries have been devastated, healthcare and pharma to a lesser degree have been vital during this crisis. And have been able to weather the storm better than most other industries. Lisa, could you start us out with an overview on sort of the state of the industry?
Sure. For professional health care media, we've all been busy adapting to working through the lockdowns and fortunately, slowly the reentry. For the publishers, they've been critical in supplying their audiences with crucial editorial around COVID-19, while also navigating the stormy waters of how best to service the media community, since we've all gone to this virtual world. For the agencies, they've been busy balancing the appropriate level of promotion during the pandemic, filling the gaps where that in-person selling has been put on hold. Who knows if it'll even come back, if they will go all virtual, that's really still up in the air. And balancing that gap with not inundating our audiences with opportunistic messaging. So today is not like yesterday and tomorrow is not going to be like today. Fortunately, like Hank was saying, AMM is going to be there for you. We're going to play an important role monitoring the trends and communicating them out to our membership.
Yeah, and this is Hank, just to jump in. It's interesting that New England Journal of Medicine published the article on the Moderna vaccine this week, and Lancet's publishing an article about the AZ vaccine on Monday. Hopefully they're both wildly successful, but the entire world seems to be waiting for when a vaccine arrives, and then everybody can open up. And it seems like there were 2 breakthroughs in the last 48 hours.
I guess it might also be worth pointing out that as we're all trying to deal with what the clients need and what the readers and users of our websites need, there's also the challenges individual companies are facing with the entire work from home phenomenon, the concerns about burnout of staff members who are starting their Zoom conferences early and ending them late, and dealing with kids and roommates and elderly parents and whatever in the background. And now the concerns about whether, how, and when to return to working in the offices. So it's a whole other layer of confusion on the industry.
Yeah, I would just kind of add to that. I think probably the heart that I take in all of this uncertainty and craziness is it seems like we've learned that humanity, business, our industry has demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt. And, you know, I think we can all agree that many of the adaptations that we've all kind of been forced to make may have legs and promise long beyond this moment. I mean, I think we've all learned, we knew they existed, but I think we've learned that virtual meetings and conferences have power that maybe we didn't really understand that they had. New people are able to participate when they weren't able to before. And I even find myself wondering, why did I spend so many years on these torturous telephone conference calls when this was available to us the whole time? So I mean, I really do take tremendous heart in the fact that we've all learned, I think, what is a vital new skill, and that's adaptation. And things are moving, and like Lisa said, one day does not look like the next day. And I think we all hope that somebody maybe here today is going to have the answers. What's the next couple of months going to look like? What's the next couple of years? And nobody knows, but I think we've figured out that we all pretty much are pretty good at adapting, and maybe we didn't know we were. So
Yeah,
And clients are also learning that as you talk to people in various places within the industry more broadly, including many of the marketing agencies. Some of the pharmaceutical companies initially were reluctant to launch products even when they got FDA approval. Now they're going ahead with launches. Some have actually accelerated launches in advertising because they don't have the ability to send their sales forces into offices.
Mm-hmm.
Clinical trials early in the outbreak were put on hold because it was so difficult to get clinical trial participants into the centers needed for monitoring them, giving them the trial agent, whatever. But they found new ways of operating. They found ways of handling that monitoring virtually and getting the drug or placebo out to the patient in other ways so the clinical trials can resume. So it may have less of a long-term impact than was at first feared.
Speaking with, guests that have appeared on the podcast, it seems, that the pandemic has evolved, or it's gone in phases, early phase, March, even late April, March, early April, where we were shutting down, we were distancing, and focus was on, treatment and virus, or treatment and vaccine. Second phase was kind of like, we've kind of adjusted to it, May, businesses were starting to realize that they could still function and actually start to innovate. Now it's, July, moving quickly towards August in the fall. It seems like there's a new batch of concerns every couple of months. Lori, Hank, could you guys provide some insight on the, pharma's response to the evolving pandemic?
Sure, I'll jump in. We've heard the word adaptation multiple times already, and I would say that certainly sums up how pharma has responded. You can all remember that, basically back in January when this was all coming to be, that researchers and scientists were able to map the DNA of the COVID-19 virus, mainly in part due to previous work that had been done on other coronaviruses and improvements in genome sequencing. That sharing of information has really escalated. And, as the virus spread, the biopharma and medical device industries responded. So I see three consequential developments. Some of you have touched on this already. Basically, innovation in R&D, manufacturing and distribution, adoption of new technologies to advance patient care and treatment, and the pivot, of course, to digital marketing and communication. Very, very briefly, just to sort of recap what's been happening in R&D, the collaborative and cooperative efforts among industry competitors, universities, institutions, foundations, governments, it's all led to expanded use of machine learning and AI, use of existing drugs for new uses, obviously diagnostic and antibody testing, and all of these drugs are even being further developed upon to enhance what they can do to treat COVID-related conditions. There's an inhalable remdesivir in the works that'll be used with other inflammatory drugs. So to date, there's actually about 800 clinical trials underway to treat, prevent coronavirus and related conditions. Technology, we've seen linking of EMRs with claims data, diagnostic information, genomics, behavioral and socioeconomic information. And again, all of this is being shared in a way that was never done before. The massive investment by government funding is leading to streamlining manufacturing processes, speeding up distribution chains. We've certainly, COVID-19 testing and products and supplies are coming to market and being manufactured even well ahead of approval. That's what's new about all of this. So there are shortages and supplies, no doubt, of raw materials and ingredients, and these are being hamstrung by the pandemic. But ultimately, the innovation and collaboration that's happening will really probably mitigate the downturn and maximize the upturns once the pandemic subsides.
Hank, did you want to chime in at all?
Yeah, just to jump in, the biggest change that I see that's here to stay is telemedicine or telehealth. And it seems like based on LexisNexis data, which is medical claims data, that segment is skyrocketing. If you have a triple bypass, you are most likely going to need to go to the operating room. However, if your child has an earache or for a psychiatric visit, telemedicine works exceedingly well. COVID is the great accelerator, and COVID has pushed telemedicine growth rates into the stratosphere. And so telemedicine is here to stay. There's a lot of different hospital groups that are working in telemedicine, but also we can see how it's working with Walgreens, CVS, et cetera. So this is an enormous disruptor for our industry, and we're going to see that is going to be something that patients expect in the future.
Hank, did you happen to see that Walgreens is opening what they're calling, I guess, Village MD?
Yeah.
Physician offices?
Yeah.
In their current locations.
I saw that. The pharmacist was critical with COVID-19 testing and COVID-19 being a part of the value chain. So throwing that, yet another change into the pharmacist's life is going to be a challenge because they are somewhat slammed at this point.
Yeah, one of the common themes that in talking to a lot of medical publishers has been the substantial gains during the pandemic in digital engagement. Do we expect the surge in engagement digitally to continue? I've heard a couple say that there's been some plateaus or pushbacks on new products that they've launched, or are we going to go back to normal? And how are commercial teams starting to plan now, for Q4 and 2021? Hank?
Well, the journals on which I work have seen a tripling of digital traffic. So I'm going to go with plateau because it certainly could not continue on that scale. So it will plateau or decrease. It increased significantly to an eye-popping number of banner impressions that were being served. That will decrease slightly or plateau because it can't continue to go up.
I've read that, aside from online viewership, use of social media has grown considerably among HCPs and consumers. Media consumption in general has expanded substantially. But I think that these higher engagement levels and varying channel use, it remains to be seen whether or not it's going to continue. And I think human behavior in general, where physicians had an affinity to a certain channel before, they'll likely go back to that in general. But of course, we've all changed our behavior in new ways to again adapt to what's happening. So I think nobody can really tell right now at this point what will eventually stick and what won't.
From a media perspective with our clients, we're all looking at 2021. It's as if business as usual in terms of planning. which I think is a very good thing. I think it's also great for the economy. Like you said, Jason, we've been very lucky and blessed that we still have work. And I think it's our responsibility to continue to do so that we're putting into the economy that's struggling. And if we can all keep working and being responsible in the work we do, I think it will benefit for everyone.
All right, John, a lot's happening in Washington and around the country in terms of government regulations, legislations. Why don't we start with the FDA, one of your favorite topics. How's the FDA performed during the health crisis, and where do you see it going moving forward?
So you're certainly right. There's plenty of what was referred to earlier in this conversation as craziness in Washington. I think the FDA is an interesting situation. It's just come out of basically a year of drifting. Scott Gottlieb resigned as FDA commissioner in March of 2019. His last day of work was in early April. So roughly 1 year before the COVID pandemic really became part of our daily lives. His successor, Dr. Hahn, was confirmed in December of 2019, but even as the COVID outbreaks really came to the fore in March, he had still not made any public appearances. He had not revealed anything about his priorities. He came to the job with no experience in the federal government or policymaking, and with no contacts and friends, either in the White House or in Capitol Hill. So he really had a baptism of fire. He first was introduced to the American public, essentially, in the context of mistakes and failings at the FDA in the early stages of the coronavirus. He was left off the coronavirus task force initially, not so much due to his own fault, but due to infighting among other people in the White House and the Department of Health and Human Services. Then there was the whole period where the CDC's lab tests were flawed and the FDA was not granting licenses to other providers to do lab testing. And we all know the story of the long delays in lab testing. Then there were complaints that they were too slow in approving drugs. So suddenly the FDA went on a spree of issuing emergency use authorizations. They issued 100 of them in the period of about a month, when they had released only 75 over the prior decade, just to give you an idea about the sudden upswing of that. And some of those EUAs appeared to be more motivated by political considerations. For example, on hydroxychloroquine, where there was sketchy evidence at best that there was any advantage to it, but obviously there were certain influential Washington observers who were pushing the product. So it all was difficult for Dr. Hahn. Not entirely his fault. Some of it is because our political leaders are frankly clueless about how drugs are developed, how they're tested, how they're approved by the FDA. And in a pandemic, of course, there's been a lot of finger pointing among different officials in the federal government and with the states and the mayors. But also he's been slow in showing leadership, and he's now working hard to try to get back ahead of the curve, to control the agenda a little by setting up accelerated pathways for COVID-related drugs and vaccines. But there are still concerns about his performance. And I think that how the FDA turns around this situation is going to be very important in a lot of different ways. Certainly it affects the track of the COVID pandemic in the future. It also may affect other things, such as the pace of new drug approvals, which after all is, pretty basic to the health of our industry, among others.
We have an election in a few months, and federal spending and budget deficits seem to be completely ignored, and they're talking about a new stimulus and all kinds of stuff. I mean, I know during an election, the money flows. State and local governments are crying for funds. it seems like we're just kind of in this flux again. How does the fiscal climate affect the healthcare industry?
Well, it makes a big difference. First, of course, the rise of healthcare costs was a big issue in Washington before this. And if COVID had not intervened, we would have expected some package of limitations on drug pricing and perhaps in some other areas of healthcare costs to have been passed before the elections. Both parties favor it. Both President Trump and many of the Democratic challengers for the position, and certainly Joe Biden, all have reasonably close positions on drug pricing, and yet that was all thrown out the door. But that affects government spending on Medicare, on the Veterans Affairs programs, and on Medicaid. And then you have what's happened in the last few months. There have been the huge relief packages for COVID. There have been 4 such bills already with $3 trillion of spending so far, and the Senate and House are currently negotiating bill number 5, which could be anywhere from $1 trillion, that's the Republican position, to $3 trillion, the Democratic position. Presumably they will come out somewhere in between those 2 points. So you have that, and then you have the impact of the severe economic recession leading to decreased tax revenues. Profits will be down, individual earnings will be down, and increased spending on the social safety net. And suddenly you have a situation where people were ignoring a $1 trillion federal deficit in last fiscal year, but that is now going to be a $3 trillion or more deficit in the current year, and it could be a significantly higher deficit after that. And there comes a point where it simply can't be ignored any longer. So that's going to be an impetus for a number of things. One will be even more concern about the cost of healthcare, including drug prices. It also is going to mean there's going to have to be another look at taxes. That would probably start with rolling back some of the corporate tax increases and tax decreases rather, and the tax decreases for high wealth individuals that were passed in December 2017. But it also, very importantly to us, means that things like the proposed tax on pharmaceutical marketing, which is popped up every once in a while, we've always been able to defeat, is going to be back on the front burner. And because states are also facing significant budget deficits, the idea of raising money through digital advertising taxes at the state level is also going to be prominent again. Such a tax was already passed by the Maryland legislature. It was vetoed by the governor, but when the Maryland legislature next convenes, it may very well be upheld, in other words, overriding the veto. And there's similar legislation pending in New York State, and it's being discussed in other states. So I think we have to be very wary of where that's going to go.
It's a tough time right now. Another major concern is data privacy, and Congress finally seems to have it on its radar. I hear that it's moving forward. We've talked about it in season 1 of the podcast, and the pandemic, is it nudging legislators to act sooner rather than later? Because even during this time, we're still hearing, a problem with Amazon, a problem with Facebook, et cetera. What's your take on data privacy and where that's moving?
Well, the timeline has definitely been delayed. I'm pretty sure from some people who were definitely in the know that I've talked with in Washington that a bill was coming to the floor of the Senate in May, had it not been for the COVID pandemic. We will see that legislation come forward in the next Congress, and it is a bipartisan effort led by 3 Republican and 3 Democratic senators. So I don't think whoever controls the Senate after the elections is going to affect the idea that a data privacy package will come forward. But the pandemic has certainly increased the stakes and increased the importance of it. Just as an example, Hank mentioned a few minutes ago that telehealth has ballooned during the pandemic, and it is likely to remain a major part of healthcare going forward. But some of the platforms on which telehealth is conducted are not HIPAA compliant, and certainly they've been prone already to hacking. which makes vulnerable health data. There also have been attempts reported in the papers. There was another report in the New York Times just yesterday, for example, about hackers in other countries who are hacking into pharmaceutical companies or clinical research organizations that are conducting clinical trials on potential COVID drugs and vaccines. That is very significant because they're not only looking for the intellectual property of those products, but they are also getting access to clinical trial data, potentially some patient health data. That's a major concern. So this is an important problem. It's only becoming more important, and you'll definitely see some kind of action next year. I should also mention that the California Consumer Privacy Act enforcement officially began about 16 days ago on July 1st. Haven't heard of any specific cases being brought so far, but it's something certainly to watch. On the ballot in November in California will be yet another privacy provision, further upping the ante, and there are similar bills in various other states. So that's just, again, pushing for federal action to make one set of parameters that is used all through the country, and that's very important.
Thanks for that update. Steph, a topic that seems to be gaining steam and may have been a little bit more popular if not for the pandemic is the possibility of a cookieless future, as Google in January, announced that they, over a 2-year period, will be joining the Safari and Firefox browsers, eliminating third-party cookies by the end of 2022. Browser usage in the US is 48% Chrome, which is Google, 35% Safari, and then, Firefox and everybody else 5, 3, 2, 1. So that's a major chunk of cookies going to be going away in the next 6, 12, 18 months. And with Google and the way they do things, they probably won't warn anybody. How do you think this is potentially going to affect the industry?
Well, first I should say that the elimination of the third-party cookie is absolutely profound, particularly in the consumer space. More so than it is, I think, in our space or even in tightly segmented business to business. But really for all of us, for years and years, we've been talking about the importance of data, data is the new currency, but there's been an over-reliance on data that marketers and publishers don't themselves own. So, if data is the currency, we've been borrowing that currency for much, much too long. So I think really what everybody's talking about right now is first-party data. I think that is the new beacon at this point. So for all of us, for consumer marketers, for consumer publishers, for business to business, for our industry, first-party data is everything. And I think we, in our space, most of us as publishers and as marketers are well ahead of the game. Because we do already reach niche audiences and we know who it is we're trying to target and we know a lot about them. So our challenges, except those of us who may be listening in who are really, really spending a lot of energy in the consumer space, our challenges are different and they're there, but they're not profound at the level that they are in the consumer space.
Yeah, and I've read some blogs and I'm kind of interested in this myself. A number of experts are suggesting, media begin to model based on their experiences with Safari and Firefox. Some other alternatives are to enhance your A/B testing to get your Chrome right, matched market testing, media mix modeling. Is AAFP or other publishers of taking any of these steps now, preparing for this?
The interesting thing, I think, is that, A/B testing, match market testing, et cetera, these are new, scary sounding words for what has kind of been direct marketing techniques since the earth cooled. This is what direct marketers have always done. Now, there are there's obviously technological challenges to implement those on the digital side, but those are practices that's just what direct marketers have always done, from Publishers Clearinghouse to, no matter what it is. My take on this as a solution to the elimination of cookies, and this is just kind of my take, is that once again, most of the energy that I read in the blogs and that I hear about are once again around right now the consumer space, which when you think about it, in the consumer space, it's been all about trying to find just that right niche audience, someone who may be going hiking this summer and needs the right pair of shoes among the billions of people who are interacting with the internet every day. So how that is going to work is a really profound question that a lot of people are struggling with. On the consumer publishing side, most of what we see about responding to cookies in these categories that you talked about, the A/B testing, match market, the energy right now is happening with the big consumer publishers, the Merediths of the world, who have hundreds and hundreds of media brands and millions and upon millions, hundreds of millions of customers, and they are trying to construct media buys that extend across brands. So, they're using some of these old school techniques to build that capability. However, even their energy is primarily focused on that first party data. It's really all about the first party data. So, once again, for healthcare publishers, we are already talking about smaller niche audiences. We're not looking for a grain of sand on an entire beach and trying to find those places. We know where our niche audiences live. We know what media brands they interact with. So the challenges, there are still challenges. They look different. They feel different, and than what we keep hearing about in most of the media and the blog space. So there are things that we have to do to react to, but really for all of us, it's still about that first party data. We need to know who these people are, how they're interacting with us, when they're interacting with us, and be able to turn that knowledge and that data into real currency that we own, that we're not borrowing from third parties.
Yeah, Lori, I know that you're a big omni-channel fan. During the pandemic, industries pivoted to digital and it's become just, a way of life. It's organic now. What have you seen with this pivot?
Things that I have read in trade publications and in talking to, some of my colleagues in the industry. By some measures, life science companies have increased what they're doing in omni-channel marketing. There's a far better knowledge set, as Stephanie was referring to, because of all of the first party data. And how pharma is using, they're basically repurposing content that they have that's already pre-approved in new and digital ways. They're digitizing content that wasn't digitized before. They're adding things like video, for example, to engage customers. And obviously this differs depending upon specialty, disease state, markets in which certain companies operate in. I've recently heard that personalization is up dramatically, and that our clients are focusing on personalization as well as the relationship that they have with HCPs and with their patients. So with the disruption in treatment plans and the pandemic in general, they've really modified their messaging to take all of this into account.
Sadly, it appears that the spike in viruses throughout the country means in-person events are very unlikely. We've got news coming out that cities and counties and states are pretty much washing out the rest of the year. and things are going to be postponed. Now, there are a few things that are still on the books, but large gatherings like medical congresses and meetings probably won't return until at least the first of the year, until we get a vaccine and everybody's vaccinated, or maybe even spring or middle of next year. Lisa, where do you see the future of in-person meetings, and how's it affecting our industry?
It is true that most of the meetings have been, not necessarily canceled, but have shifted to be virtual meetings. But there is one meeting right now, the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposia, that is still on the schedule. They are taking hotel reservations, and believe it or not, San Antonio. So it is a smaller meeting, and I'm hopeful that they're able to hold the meeting. It's at the beginning of December, and maybe it can be a guide to future meetings. Maybe we have to scale down the size of some of these larger meetings, but it is possible to do them. It'll be interesting to see what kind of attendance they get if they are able to hold it. But I do think that there have been some meetings that have switched over to virtual. And I think with technology, they're able to do a lot in that channel for their constituents. I would say from a media perspective, the sponsorships and those sort of things that pharma participates in, I think it shouldn't cost the same as if you were going to be there in person. Some of the meetings have gone virtual, and the sponsorships are, from what I'm hearing from my clients, the sponsorship costs are remaining the same, and they're not allowing them to walk away from their commitments. So I think we're going to have to adapt and really consider what the true value is to everything, and just keep monitoring and seeing the success of the virtual meetings as they happen. And then hopefully, I hope I can come back the beginning of next year and say, hey, San Antonio went off without a hitch, and they were able to do it in a safe way.
Yeah, and a shameless plug for the podcast again. The next episode is with Benji Kane, who's a VP of Experiential and Learning for the new Medscape Live, and he talks about exactly what Lisa was just talking about there, how the Medscape is trying to keep the prices, sponsorship prices for their programs in line with what it would have been in person. And it is a hot topic, not just in our industry and in other industries. Hank, any other thoughts on where medical meetings are and what they mean and what it means for the industry?
No, other than annual meeting is a place for an association to receive 75, 80% of revenue for the year. So, and I'm sure in 2020, insurance covered that loss of revenue. However, moving forward, I am anxious to attend those meetings because of the financial health of our partners.
And Steph, what is AAFP planning for?
Oh, we've pivoted. We've pivoted. Our national conference for residents and students is happening in a couple of weeks. That we made plans to pivot that. That's one of those examples where I talked about we are having record numbers of registrants because a lot of residents and students who could not get on an airplane and come to Kansas City are able to participate this way. And we are in the process, not in the process, it has pivoted our big family medicine experience, a scientific assembly that happens this fall. has pivoted to digital. So we're just kind of putting the final touches on those right now. I say we, I can't take credit for any of this because we have a
Yes, you can.
whole wonderful group that's managing all this, but it is pivoting to digital, and they are also reporting registrants, first-time registrants who have never come before, lots of them registering for this virtual experience. So it's
There's
going to
the
be really
value.
fun to see.
Yeah, a lot of the feedback has been most, virtual parts of meetings and events in the past have not been asynchronous or have not been real time. And now that you make it real time instead of get a CD a month later or catch up, on a virtual presentation, that real time is starting to really reel people in. And that's where they see potential growth down the road. So you'll be able to capture both the in-person and virtual in a more aggregated way, I guess is a way to say it.
That's right. And I wanted to add our CME division. They produce live events all over the country, smaller regional CME learning events. And they started pivoting almost immediately because they were already able to do some of this stuff. So back in March, they started pivoting all of their events to virtual. And quite honestly, even financially, it's working pretty well. Particularly when there's the opportunity to get out of hotel contracts and all that, because the costs are so much lower, but people will still register and pay to participate in this learning, and it's been a real success. I think even maybe not from a top line revenue basis, but from a bottom line net revenue basis, it's been a success. So I'm sure we'll be doing a lot more of that even after this is over.
Yeah, it sounds like a new hybrid model will be evolving in the next year, 2, 3 years, where there'll be both opportunities.
Yeah.
Hank, AMM has a keen interest in assisting its members and the industry with actionable research. Where does AMN stand on this issue, both short and long term?
We put together a benchmarking committee. However, we have decided as a group that that's not our core competency. So we are, word of the day, pivoting away from that benchmarking group. Lisa, do you want to jump in?
Yes. So as an association, we decided let's put that aside for now. That won't best serve our membership. I think that right now, with all that is going on, I think we're taking a wait and see position on future research. I think right now is a time for us to really monitor what's going on, especially because it changes every day. So potentially, we would be able to look at what going virtual means and how we can best serve our members, even from a simple, like, how is it best to work with the media community now in this virtual world?
Right.
Maybe with the younger folks, you'll actually get them on Zoom meetings, and when it was so hard in the past to get them for in-person meetings, I think potentially this could be very, very good for us. And again, just like I had said earlier, I think AMM is going to be jumping in and finding out what is really the most valuable information for our membership, and then communicating it out to everyone.
As a former editor, I would also note it's an opportunity to get people who are not on the marketing side of our member companies to participate a lot more.
Yeah. Well, speaking about editorial, John, there's a new term floating around called the infodemic, which is kind of interesting. It's confusion, inconsistency, outright chaos. That's the way I kind of think about it. Each of those words can be used to describe our response to the pandemic. How has the health crisis exposed, even fueled misinformation, and what are the public health ramifications?
Well, I think the pandemic has helped to show the damage that is done by rampant misinformation this can probably be said in many areas, but certainly rampant misinformation about healthcare. We've seen this coming out of social media. There's all the silly things that people were early on suggesting were causing COVID. There's been a lot of misinformation about what does or does not potentially work, who is or who is not potentially most at risk, how large is the risk, how real is the risk, misconceptions about things like herd immunity or the value of social distancing or wearing masks, all the rest. And some of that has been fed by our governmental leaders at the federal, state, and local levels. We've had very confused messaging to the public about what is going to help to reduce the impact of this pandemic. And we've left the public totally confused. I think that people in many parts of the country honestly do not understand. They don't understand what has or has not been proved. They don't understand how drugs or vaccines are developed. They've been led to expect, for example, that a vaccine will be a silver bullet curing this problem this winter. That's not the most likely case. I mean, that would be an almost inconceivable best case scenario to have a vaccine ready to go this winter. But people have been led to think that that's going to happen, led by our government officials and frankly also led by corporate press releases. And people have been led to believe that scientists are conspiring to keep the public from using useful drugs, or to believe that the FDA is stalling on approving drugs. So all of this does a real harm to public health. The public's confused. They're not doing the things that they should be doing. We're seeing tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths, almost certainly because of this, and it prolongs the economic recession. And then second is it encourages a situation where there could be a danger that a vaccine is brought to market too soon, based on speed, not based on proven efficacy and safety. When you think about it, a failed vaccine launch, in other words, bringing out a vaccine that has a high incidence of side effects and is not effective, could do really long-term damage to then eventually having an effective vaccine, not to mention that it just feeds into the whole anti-vaxxer movement that would spill over into other diseases. And the third is the damage that's been done to the reputations of our federal health agencies. To the extent people don't believe what the CDC says, what the FDA says, what the NIH says, that's a long-lasting damage. It's so easy to lose credibility. It's so hard to win it back. And that may come back to bite us, not only in this pandemic, but remember, there's nothing that says you can't have two pandemics at once. So you could have a really bad flu season. There are other organisms out there that could come back. And I'd just like to add that I think personally that is an area where AMM members can help. For years, going back to when we were all about print journals as opposed to multimedia platforms, research has shown that clinicians have developed a real sense of trust in AMM publications, both our specialty journals, our controlled circulation primary care journals. I believe we're seeing that. I think that many of our publishers are talking about increased engagement with their print journals and their digital platforms. And I think it'd be great if we could find ways that AMM journals could build upon that relationship to increase readership, increase revenue, increase our clout in providing accurate and credible information.
Anybody else want to talk about the infodemic, how it's maybe affected you or your organization, or just personally? No, we can.
Yeah, let's don't get into the personally part. That's a whole thing.
Well, along those same lines, the pandemic has consumed the headlines, but we're less than 4 months to an election. and not just the presidential election. It seems that, the Senate might be back in play and all kinds of different things. Anybody have thoughts on where we might be, not just with, a vaccine in the new year, but with a potentially new or different, landscape in Washington? Start with you, John. You're there.
Well, I think there are a number of ways in which the Republican and Democratic positions, specifically on some of the issues related to our industry, are similar, but there also are ways in which they are quite different. I think that regardless of whether Donald Trump is reelected or Joe Biden is elected, and whether the Republicans or Democrats control the Senate, I think everyone assumes the Democrats will continue to control the House. We will see a package of drug pricing legislation come out. And actually, if you look at the positions that the Trump administration has taken on drug pricing over the last 3 years, and you look at the positions that Biden is outlining in, for example, his healthcare speech earlier this week and his plan, which is at his campaign website, there's a lot of overlap there. There is a lot of commonality in what they're concerned about and in some of the solutions, which include things like some kind of international pricing, some kind of negotiation of prices, reinforcing the supply chains so that there is more control over where drugs are coming from. I also think that no matter which party controls the Senate or the White House, there will be a data privacy legislation package, as I mentioned, that would bring forward a federal regime for monitoring data privacy and also data security. I think where the differences are more in the context of public health and national health insurance. So I'll take the second first. The Trump administration, of course, has been opposed to the Affordable Care Act since it first came into office. Even very recently, they have filed briefs in support of the arguments in front of the Supreme Court right now to declare the entire Affordable Care Act to be unconstitutional. The Supreme Court is going to issue a decision one way or the other by the end of this coming term. So by next June 2021, there will be a decision. If the Supreme Court determines that the ACA is unconstitutional, then something has to be done pretty quickly because 25 million or so Americans will be losing their health insurance. So if the Republicans are in control of the agenda, this means there can no longer be talking about repealing the ACA without having something to replace it. So something has to come forward. It will be very interesting to see what that might be. If the Democrats are in power, then obviously they will want to find some way of bringing back some form of the Affordable Care Act in a version that would be constitutional. It's also possible that the Supreme Court will say that it is constitutional, in which case I suspect that the Trump administration will just move on and stop talking about the Affordable Care Act, and it will, just exist for the next 4 years, and then we see what happens after that. If there's a President Biden, I think you will see him try to put in place a public option. I don't think Medicare for all is in the cards, but some kind of public option. The reasons that our industry might be very interested in this, first off, we're all Americans, we're all citizens, we're all healthcare consumers. So there's the personal interest in having good health insurance for ourselves and for our families. And at least in my humble opinion, it is important that more Americans be covered by health insurance. But if you look at it just from a business perspective, if 25 million Americans suddenly lost their health insurance, they would also be losing their prescription coverage. So that would be a big hit in the pharmaceutical industry, which means a big hit on our clients. So that's to keep in mind. And then another point is that the Affordable Care Act is not just Obamacare. The Affordable Care Act was a several hundred-page document which also included a lot of other things, including the Medicare innovation programs. It includes the Sunshine Act. So the Sunshine Act would be up for reenactment, which means opening up what the categories and guidelines are. There's a lot of things that would fall out of that decision. And then the other area that would be affected would be the fate of the federal health agencies. As I said earlier, there's been a lot of damage done to the reputations of the CDC, the Food and Drug Administration, the NIH. I think you will see changes no matter who is elected president. I think there are going to be several changes at the heads of these agencies if Trump gets reelected. He's not pleased with the group he has. He will find replacements for them. We'll see what direction that goes. Obviously, if Joe Biden is elected, you'll have a whole new set of people. You're going to have a lot of rethinking, a postmortem, one way or the other, on our performance in the pandemic. I think who controls that is going to be very important. And I think it is important that coming out of that, some steps are taken to improve public health readiness for the next pandemic, whenever it may come. And I think there'll be a different approach taken by the presidency of a Joe Biden than there would be the presidency of a Donald Trump. But that remains to be played out.
All right. Well, we're past the hour mark. And I want to thank all of our guests for joining us today and the panelists for their time and commentary. Hank, I'd like to pass the baton to you to close us out.
Okay, well, I thought this was a very interesting panel. John Bigelow for Coalition for Healthcare sort of set it up, talking about the rampant information with COVID, the causes of COVID, the risks of COVID, and what's going to be working with COVID. It looks like COVID is the great accelerator where decades are happening in weeks. The AMM, Association of Medical Media, had a panel in April, and the theme of the panel ended up being, I don't know. And it was, at that stage, I don't know what my budgets are going to be like. I don't know what role marketing has, if anything, during the COVID epidemic. And I think today, with the AMM panel, I'm hearing much more about what Stephanie Hanaway, AAFP talks about, adaption. So it's pivoting to virtual congresses, pivoting to a digital solution, pivoting to NPP, new personal promotion. And Lisa Healy also talked about that, how planning in 2021 looks right now to be business as usual. And Lori Raskin said, we're going to pivot to personalization. We're going to pivot to rely on our relationships with healthcare professionals. So I like the direction we're going in. In April, the theme was, I don't know. And that was sort of so much uncertainty. And now, here we are in July, it seems like I still don't know. However, I am confident that there's a plan B that I can pivot to. And I'm confident that there's another solution that we can work through these challenges. So I really like what I'm hearing. It seems like as a group, we are adapting.
Thanks again, everybody, for your time. Listen up again. Check out the podcast, AMM Conversation, shameless plug again. And again, lots of resources available on ammonline.org. Keep an eye out for John Bigelow and I's new monthly video chat. And everybody stay safe and have yourself a great day. And